Hello and welcome to today's show where I will be unpacking presidential approval rating polling. So what does that mean? What I'm going to be looking at is how approval rating polling is done and why it's valuable. We will also look at good polling versus bad polling. We will look at some historical polling data, so approval ratings through the last few presidencies. And we will look at current polling of our current president, Donald Trump, and what it could mean heading forward. But before that, it is time to jump into our quick hits of the week. And we will be starting with Kilmar Abrego Garcia and providing an update on his story. So recently, Senator Chris Van Hollen from Maryland visited on April 17th. And he was able to get a face-to-face meeting with Abrego Garcia after some initial pushback once he arrived in El Salvador. Now, this face-to-face meeting was the first time Abrego Garcia was able to talk to someone outside of the prison since he was illegally abducted and sent to El Salvador. Now, as of recording, other Democrats, including Maxwell Frost, are currently in El Salvador or are in the process of getting to El Salvador in order to get more information about this prison system and Abrego Garcia. And at the time of recording, no one outside of Van Hollen has been able to actually meet Abrego Garcia. So that could change by the time this comes out, but at the time of the recording, that is the update. Now, the Republican Party and the Trump administration, they are trying to double down on this. Even though they already admitted it was an administrative error. So what they are currently doing is Trump is now claiming that he was a member of MS-13, a different gang, but he has no criminal record and there's no real proof of this. And at the end of the day, guys, it does not matter. Legally, the Trump administration must facilitate his return. That is what the courts ruled. And back in actually 2019, the judge made an order barring deportation. So that's already on record. But guys, it does not matter whether he has a criminal record or not, even though he doesn't. Everyone deserves due process. And that means you are innocent until proven guilty. And that applies to everyone. I am going to do a story in a second about or in a few minutes about the Florida state shooting. That individual also deserves due process. It does not matter, guys. Due process is one of the bedrocks of our judicial system. And if we ignore it and just do whatever we want without going through the legal system, that means everyone is up for grabs and there is no real pushback anymore if the precedent has been set that anyone can be abducted and just sent anywhere. So I will be continuing to follow this story and provide you guys updates as it continues to evolve. Now, story number 2, this kind of links with that first story. Trump discusses deporting homegrown citizens. So when discussing the Abrego Garcia case in the White House, Trump threw around the idea of deporting homegrown U.S. citizens. So here's the clip for you guys.
We also have homegrown criminals that push people into subways, that hit elderly ladies on the back of the head with a baseball bat when they're not looking, that are absolute monsters. I'd like to include them in the group of people to get them out of the country.
As I mentioned before, playing this video in the first story, guys, due process is enshrined in the Constitution. It is a basic right we all have, that we are innocent until proven guilty. And then one of the biggest ironies in this and the hypocrisy is he is sitting in the White House talking about deporting homegrown criminals when he is sitting there with 34 felonies on his back. So if you wanted to deport homegrown criminals, he would fall directly in that purview. And that doesn't even include the civil case that he was found liable for sexual abuse in court and the dozens of other sexual abuse cases and accusations that are against him. So the fact he is talking about deporting people like himself is kind of, the hypocrisy knows no bounds, right? But guys, it's just part of the attack on our basic rights, similar to the previous story. Everyone deserves due process in the United States of America. Point blank, full stop, end of story. All right, moving on to story number 3. This is the Florida State University story I was talking about. United States, so another shooting, but this shooting left 2 dead and 6 injured on the Florida State campus. I am not going to provide the shooter's name. You guys can look that up for yourself if you want to, but I don't want to kind of give him a platform via his name. But he was a stepson of a Leon County sheriff deputy. And he opened fire last Thursday at the Florida State University Student Union at around 11:50, right before noon. Now, he was taken into custody. I think he still remains in custody in the hospital to this point because he was shot by police and he is receiving medical care at the time of this recording. Now, who is this person? What is his background? And I am someone, guys, who I do think it's important to understand the why, because if we don't understand the why and interview these people and find out their background, it's liable to, it's likely to happen again and again and again. So this person, people around him said the shooter had extreme right-wing conspiracy theories and a history of espousing radical and hateful conspiracy theories. There's a story that he was kicked out of a political roundtable for white supremacy talk, and he's had fascinations with Hitler and other Nazi ideologies. So, guys, we have a very toxic stew in this country where people get a microphone, they have huge audiences, they spread hate, violence, lies, right? Just very, very aggressive rhetoric, right? Nonstop. And there's no accountability. So people can go online. I will check that 1 second. Alex Jones did have a little bit of accountability because he was so extreme with the Sandy Hook stuff. But in general, guys, a lot of people with right-wing microphones, they're spreading hate nonstop. There's no accountability. And then when you pair that with our ease of access to guns and our severe mental illness problem we have in this country with a failing healthcare system, this is what we get time after time again. And guys, I'm actually going to do Unpacking Gun Violence on Sunday's episode. And I wasn't even doing that because of this shooting. It was already planned. And then because there's basically a mass shooting weekly in this country or multiple times a day in certain situations, it just happened to align. Overall, guys, and you can see from this graphic I have on the screen now, the amount of gun violence we have in the United States is completely out of control. And on Sunday, like I said, I'm going to dive into it and break it down a little bit more. Now, in terms of this specific story, though, Florida State University resumed classes on Monday. So it was a pretty quick turnaround. They did provide counseling services and they did add remote learning options for students and some waivers for students after the student body pushed back about resuming classes so soon after such a tragic event. So that's that story. I imagine we will hear more about the shooter as he, as time passes. But once again, the toxic stew of just that right-wing vitriol and hate, nonstop, mental illness, easy access to guns, and this is what we get. Now, fourth story is about Harvard and Trump. So Harvard University is suing Trump administration over the federal funding freeze. So if you guys have not heard about this story, the Trump administration put in a $2.2 billion federal funding freeze on Harvard University with the potential of adding an additional $1 billion of frozen funding as well. Now, some of the reason that the administration froze this funding is because Harvard would not agree to some of the administration's requests. And these are just 3 of the long list of requests. So federal audits, of Harvard's programs, screening international students for their beliefs, and installing administrators who are in alignment with the White House directives. So, guys, this case will likely make it all the way to the Supreme Court. what is always scary about that is our Supreme Court does not represent the people it serves. It is conservative leaning heavily, and that is not the actual makeup of the country. But I envision this will get to the Supreme Court, and they're going to determine the validity of Harvard's claim regarding that or stating that the White House is basically violating their First Amendment rights with this funding freeze. Now, guys, Harvard is arguing that these implications are clear. Let the White House basically micromanage, and you better bend the knee and comply with everything they say, or else you will lose funding for important research in science and medicine. That's basically the message. Guys, this is all part of the administration's authoritarian playbook. They want compliance. They want bending the knee. They don't care about balances. They don't care about the Constitution. We see this time after time with story after story. But guys, this is not a dictatorship. We are not ruled by a king, at least not yet. My fingers remain crossed with what we are seeing. But another important story to monitor to see how it plays out in the courts, and backing up with that, if this administration actually listens to what the courts say, or if they just break the law once again and ignore court directives. All right, fifth and final story. This one was, I'm not gonna lie, my eyes went like saucers when I saw this video clip. Protester was stun gunned, and multiple protesters were also escorted out at Marjorie Taylor Greene Town Hall. If you guys do not know who Marjorie Taylor Greene is, she is easily one of the biggest embarrassments we have in our political world. She has said things about Jewish space lasers. She has crazy conspiracy theories. She doesn't understand at all how our government functions. She basically gets clout from saying and doing insane things. But she is a deep embarrassment. But nonetheless, I'm going to go ahead and play some parts from the clip of this town hall, excuse me. Embrace yourself. It was chaotic.
Don't do this. Don't do this.
He grabbed me.
Yes. Don't do this.
It's not working. Okay, stop. Oh. Come on, outside. Go. Put your hands like that. Behind your back. Down. Don't move. Stop.
Well, welcome everyone.
Are you really doing this?
Stop.
Are you really doing this?
Stop.
Are you really doing this? Really?
So this trend, guys, of removing dissent with violence and force has increased under this administration. We saw during Trump's inaugural address, or I think it was a State of the Union address, if I'm not mistaken, the Democratic leader getting removed from the speech, whereas when that was flipped around, when Biden was giving his address and Republicans were screaming, no one was removed. So there is a trend now for this Republican administration to use force to silence speech. And another part of this story, you couldn't hear it as much in the clip, but it's just another example of the way elected representatives think about us, their constituents, is truly, truly disgusting. Marjorie Taylor Greene looked at her constituents as less than her, and that is a trend that a lot of politicians, unfortunately, seem to operate under, that they're above us, when in reality, guys, I've said this a bunch of times, politicians are supposed to serve us, not the other way around. They are not better than us. They do not deserve our, like, bowing down and praising. They deserve to, their role is to serve us and pass policies that best benefit people. So just really disturbing, once again, the way that a politician is talking to their constituents. And guys, bigger picture with this, the stun gunning of people coming to town halls, the town hall rage we are seeing, the mass protest, we are moving closer and closer to societal collapse. because you cannot keep treating people with disregard and violence and not listening to their concerns and then not expect revolt and revolution. So as this administration continues to enrage voter after voter, I imagine interactions like this will increase. And remember, guys, this is the same administration that used force and violence to disperse protesters so Donald Trump could hold up what he called a Bible upside down, obviously knowing none of the words that are in there. So that's the administration we are dealing with. I imagine these town halls are going to continue to get more intense and more intense as this administration continues to double down on their incredibly unpopular policies. So that wraps up the quick hits of the week. Now we're going to jump forward to the main part of the show where I will be unpacking presidential approval ratings, starting with overall, what in the world are these approval ratings that I will be talking about? So approval ratings, and I'm going to specifically, guys, be talking about presidential approval ratings because you can look up different politicians and even like individual issues, but we are going to be talking about presidential approval ratings here. These polls are basically the percent of the electorate who approves of the president. Now, your goal is generally 50% or higher, obviously 50% being half, but higher the better. And we're going to look at how some presidents have performed over time so you can kind of compare and contrast. Now, what you may also see in the news is something called net approval, which is basically a combination of the president's approval and disapproval. So let's say 52% of people who are polled approve of the president's performance, but 40% disapprove. That net approval would be plus 12, right? You're 12 in the positive, whereas if you have a negative net approval, the inverse would be true, meaning more people disapprove of your performance than approve. Now, something that's also important to know if you're kind of new to this polling is it doesn't always have to add up to 100%. Because a lot of times in these polls, it may be like neither approve or disapprove as an option. So a lot of times it does not add all the way to 100%. So that's important to note also. Now, why am I talking about this? Why does this matter? It gives these approval ratings and some of this data I'm going to give you guys today. It gives a very good snapshot of what people are thinking about different political figures as a whole. And in our increasingly like segregated political bubbles. And what I mean by that is the social media algorithms, right? Feeding you kind of your same political talking points, whether you're centrist, a left-leaning political person, or a right-leaning, it tends to feed you the same information. Looking at actual data like this and approval ratings allows you to break out of your bubble and see what the data is actually saying nationwide. And it also allows you to check your biases and your perceptions. So you may really like, politician A, but the whole country, maybe their approval ratings only at like 30%. So then it's a time to kind of check maybe your blind spots or look further and analyze further. Why do I like this politician or what they're standing for, but it's not connecting with people at large? It also allows you to see which candidates are polling well, which ones are not polling well, so that you can see the trends, right, for strategic advantage. Now, one of this polling, whether it's the approval ratings we're going to talk to or just polling in general, political polling, it's one of the best tools, guys, I use to do just a general pulse check. Yes, I could talk to people, but talking to people is not as good as getting actual, full data from large polling institutions, right? So next thing we're going to talk about, we have these polls, but not all polls are created equal. So we're going to talk about the good polling methods versus the bad polling methods. Now, Overall, guys, good polls should be random representative samples. Because we cannot interview everybody, for instance, about Donald Trump, do you approve or disapprove of his current performance, right? You can't interview hundreds of millions of people, even though that would get you the most accurate result. We know that's not possible. That would take a lot of money, a lot of time, and it would be hard to get everyone to answer. So in these small samples, you want to make sure every person has an equally likely chance of being picked, and the survey group should represent the population that it is trying to survey or get an idea about. So for instance, guys, with presidential polling, often you want a sample that represents the U.S. population, right? So you're going to want people from different backgrounds, different genders, different socioeconomic standpoints that models the electorate. That's the goal with good polling, okay? Now, another thing with good polling is good polling methodology or good polls tend to be very transparent about how they collected their data. So if you are ever looking at polling or data and it's unclear how it was gathered, or you're looking for transparency and they're not providing it, that's a red flag that this is probably more propaganda than it is quality, scientific, well done, well-researched polling, okay? Other thing I want to add is there is a margin of error in every poll. If it is done well, guys, there will be errors. That's just how it works with almost any field of study. Now, this error could be from people mistakenly answering questions. So not necessarily lying, guys, but more forgetting. So that can happen. But almost every poll has a margin of error. It's usually maybe 1 to 2 percentage points, maybe 3. But looking at more data gives an accurate representation. And that is one of the biggest takeaways I want you guys to have today. I often look at something like this that's on the screen. This is from New York Times. And what it does is it has an average or it lists a bunch of different polling sites, right? And you can even see they actually indicate some of the stronger polling methodologies with the diamond that you can see. But it is a huge collection of all these different surveys because individual surveys, guys, can be biased either intentionally, like propaganda, or unintentionally, just due to unconscious bias or poor, methodologies. So looking at multiple polls and then trying to find an overall average is the best approach. Do not rely just on one poll. Now, if you only want to rely on 1, maybe 2, maybe 3, ABC News did rank the best pollsters from 2024, and you guys can see that on the screen now. You can see here New York Times, Washington Post I also use frequently. The other ones I use frequently that are listed here are actually YouGov and Quinnipiac, but I want to once again mention, guys, I look at all of them together to see if the trends are consistent and that there are no outliers. I also use, it's not mentioned on, it wasn't mentioned on the screen, but I also use Gallup from time to time and Pew Research as well. But guys, as a whole, you want to look at multiple points of research so that you can come to an overall conclusion and trend from the data. Now, with that laid out, we talked about approval ratings and good versus bad polling. We are going to talk now specifically about historical presidential approval. So guys, overall, average approval ratings show, and you can see it right now from this graphic, that we are incredibly divided as a country in recent history. So as far back as this polling does go, and this, guys, is from Gallup. And the second time around, which is coming up now, it is even harder to keep your approval rating up. So generally, people who serve a second term, their approval rating is lower than how they finish their first term. Now, why is this? Well, there's a few factors, right? There's some nuance, but in general, the longer you are in office, the more people expect you to deliver, right? If you're in office for 8 years, you should be getting more done than if you're only in office for 3 or 4 years, right? So that's kind of part of it. Another thing is the longer you're in office, the more time there is for people to poke holes in you as a candidate or as a politician. So there's more time for the general public to be turned off by a decision you make. And guys, what actually happens politically is it's very difficult to get someone back once you've lost them. So what I mean by that, if a politician makes a certain political decision that really turns off a voter, it is that voter will likely never approve of that person's performance almost no matter what. There are exceptions, but that is generally what the data says. Now, this trend that I mentioned of ratings decreasing, so the approval ratings decreasing over time in office, is true for nearly every candidate in recent history. So you can see here from Joe Biden, his approval rating went down over time in office. Trump's first term, and Trump, guys, a very interesting character because he is one of the only presidential figures that I've researched or seen that actually entered the office already below a 50% approval rating. So I think that just speaks to the sad state of the Democratic Party. Because Trump, guys, a misconception about Trump is he's never been popular. Okay, he really hasn't been. His approval rating, you guys can see, it's generally always been below 50%. What makes Trump unique and why people have this false sense of his popularity is he does have like a cult-like following. So it makes it seem like he has more support because his supporters have basically a cult-like devotion to him on a certain degree. So he's not popular as a whole. It's just people who do like him really do. Now, moving on to Obama. So you can see Obama started incredibly high approval, finished still above 50, but lower than he started. George W. Bush, we see a similar trend, started at 57%, finished at 34%. Bush has a very interesting trajectory because that huge spike you guys see that's almost vertical, that was a approval response to his handling after the 9/11 attacks. But then what happened is over time, when we started as a country figuring out what the Bush administration was actually doing with like illegal wiretapping and things like that, his approval in the weapons of mass destruction lie, his approval rating entirely cratered after that. Now, Bill Clinton is bucking the trend. So he actually started with a 58% and finished at 66% approval. And other people who also had that trend of actually leaving office with higher approval than they entered, Ronald Reagan, which is pictured now. I unpack, guys, some of Reagan's policies and how that really had a detrimental effect on income inequality and a lot of other programs that Ronald Reagan implemented, but there is no arguing that at the time he was very popular. But his policies have been incredibly detrimental to the middle class in this country. And George H.W. Bush also actually left with high approval rating than he entered. So overall, guys, once again, the trend historically is the approval rating goes down over time. Now, that is incredibly important because that's going to lead us to current polling and what we are seeing with our current president, Donald Trump, in his second term. So Donald Trump's, guys, approval rating is already in the absolute gutter less than 100 days into office. It is historically, like I said, very hard to turn around an approval rating unless there's something dramatic that happens like what happened with Bush in 9/11. Now, what's likely going to happen here, guys, is this approval rating, and you guys can see from this image, JL Partners, I do want to highlight here, that tells me immediately it's an outlier. So you guys can see the trend here of the negative net rating, and then you see this random one with a high approval. So that is why, guys, we look at all of the polls, because if you just look at that one, you could be led to believe that he has a positive approval rating. So just wanted to note that. But not a single pollster, it didn't matter if it was JL Partners or any of them listed, not one has him above 50% approval, guys. And that is astonishing considering he's less than 100 days in. The only other president who had similar terrible approval was Donald Trump in his first term, where he had a 41% approval around the same time of his first term. Now he's currently sitting around 45%. And guys, one thing another thing that I want to mention here, and not to circle back too much to historical trends, but if he continues with this pace, it is going to continue to go down, down, down into the 30s. And what is astonishing is the rate at which his approval is decreasing. So you can see from this chart, the problem isn't just that his approval is low in the 40s, it's that it's tanking at a pace that's completely unsustainable. It is sinking much faster than any other president in modern history. It's sinking faster than his first term. It's sinking faster than Biden's term. So overall, guys, my takeaways from this polling is people either did not know what they were voting for when they voted for Trump, didn't show up because they didn't think it would be this serious. But guys, he is doing a lot of what he mentioned on the campaign trail and what is in Project 2025. So that, what is it called? That friction or that delineation between like, he's doing what he ran on, yet people are unhappy with it, tells me that people didn't fully understand how serious this was going to be with this man being elected. If you are listening to this podcast, by the way, you are probably far more politically engaged and aware of what's going on than the average person. That is something to always check with and be aware of, because most people, guys, are not that politically engaged. They go to work, they have a ton of things to handle, and they don't really know what's going on with politics. So what's going to be interesting to me heading forward, because the Republican Party should be very alarmed at this. So whether they continue to just gaslight the American public, which is what they have been doing, and just not caring and lying about the situation, that is avenue number one, or lane number one they continue to go down. Or will they make substantial changes before the midterm so that they do not lose like the House and the Senate in 2026? You being the Republican Party, they can only lie for so long until eventually it's going to catch up with them, particularly when it comes to the economy. You can't lie to the people and say like the economy is doing well when they go to their grocery store and they see their grocery bill not only hasn't gone down, but it's gone up. So there's going to be a fork in the road moment. It looks like we're already hitting it with many constituents and voters now. Now, the Republican Party as a whole, guys, they have attached their ship to Donald Trump. So as his approval rating increases or decreases, that is where the Republican Party is going to go. Fortunately, if you're a Republican leader, the Democratic Party is incredibly weak right now. If it wasn't, and there was a strong opposition party, the Republicans would be in a world of hurt. But polling for the Democrats also shows that they are incredibly unpopular right now. With that said, silver lining here, guys, the popular politician, the most popular politician in most polling is Bernie Sanders from Vermont. His favorability is constantly in the double digits. And what we see with the Fight the Oligarchy tour, he turns out numbers. He's an incredibly popular politician right now. He is a progressive. He is one of the biggest progressives, if not the biggest progressive, alongside AOC. And now, guys, what is also interesting with the polling is AOC normally does not poll anywhere near as good as Bernie Sanders, right? I think there's a few reasons for that. I think one of the reasons is she is a female. She is also not white. I think that plays a role, whereas Bernie Sanders is a white male. We unfortunately have a segment of the population who will not listen to women in leadership roles, and particularly when they're women of color. It's a little bit more difficult of an uphill battle. So I think that's part of it. I also think AOC has less clout than Bernie because she hasn't been doing it for as long. So Bernie Sanders, there's no like facade there. He's been doing the same thing his entire career. So he has a greater deal of clout and earned, respect from voters due to his lifelong work, whereas AOC is still very young. But guys, AOC's polling is now going up as well with her attachment to Bernie. So my big takeaways here, and it's guys, I know if you've been listening and I've been beating this drum, but the Progressive Party would dominate in upcoming elections if the Democratic Party would just adopt those policies and become the progressive wing. They are the most popular politicians we have. Their policies are incredibly popular. And more importantly, the centrist corporate Democratic policies and the Republican policies, people hate them. Okay, we can see it with Trump's approval rating. You can see it with the anger at town halls. There's endless data. People are upset. So this polling is just telling me there's opportunities there if the Democrats want it. My sadness comes from the fact I do not think they will capitalize enough on the opportunity presented in front of them. But guys, that wraps up a lot of the polling information, the current polling, some historical polling, along with just good versus bad polling, so that when you guys are searching on your own, you make sure that you are looking at quality data and you're not, guzzling down all of the propaganda that is unfortunately out there. So we are going to finish, as we always do, with our shout out of the week. And this week's shout out of the week goes to you, the American citizens, if you've been to any of the hands-off protests. So whether you've helped organize, whether you spoke at one of them, whether you've made a sign and just showed up to speak your voice. There was a second hands-off protest this past Saturday, which are basically, guys, nationwide protests across the country, basically protesting the actions of this administration. And there's been great turnout all over the country in all 50 states. So along with the town halls, guys, and keeping showing up and keeping, using our voices, we need to continue to show up and organize. We've seen success with the Target boycotts. We've seen success with the Tesla boycotts, right? Coming together as a unit is where our power is. Okay. We don't have, unfortunately, much power because power is often money in this country. And unless you're a millionaire or billionaire, we have very limited power as individuals. But organizing and coming together, that is where the change comes. And that is where our power lies. So one thing that I do, guys, I went to a recent hands-off protest in kind of my local area. The easiest place to find out about it, I find, is social media. I think Facebook events tend to be the best. Generally, I'm not the biggest fan of Facebook, but neither here nor there. It is great for organizing events, and I find Facebook to be a little bit better than Instagram when it comes to finding out about protests and ways to get involved in events in your local area. So that wraps up this episode on unpacking presidential approval ratings. Tomorrow, so you guys will see me back to back since I'm a little delayed with this with the Easter weekend and taking a little bit of a vacation, but you will see me tomorrow with the midweek mailbag. So if you are a binge watcher, you got back to back TJacks Unpacks. And then Sunday, guys, I will be unpacking gun violence. So that's going to be a very heavy topic, but I definitely think it's a topic we need to discuss, especially with the rampant gun violence problem we have in the United States. So that for now, we'll get to that on Sunday, but this wraps up TJacks Unpacks on unpacking the presidential approval ratings. So until next time, guys, see ya. Thank you for watching and being part of a growing progressive community. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And if you have the time, check out some of my other episodes you can see around me. Thank you.